Aloha mai kako. Welcome on in to our webinar, everyone. Thank you for your interest and thank you for taking time to join us today. Happy to have you all here. My name is Heather McMillen. I'm the Urban and Community Forester within the Division of Forestry and Wildlife in our Department of Land and Natural Resources here. Our program is called Kaulunani. That is our state urban and community forestry program. So thanks again for joining us. Just a little bit of housekeeping before we dive right in. You all know that this information session today is about the Inflation Reduction Act, which is a little bit of a mouthful. So I'm just going to refer to it as IRA from here on out, but I will try and keep other acronyms to a minimum. As you should have noticed when you came into the session, this is being recorded. You should be aware of that. We will make the video recording as well as the PowerPoint that we're sharing available on our website after this is finished. And we have the Q&A enabled. We encourage you to wait till the end to actually pose any questions. We have allowed time at the end of this hour for addressing your questions specifically. But if you have questions coming into this, you might find that they're addressed before we get to the end. So be patient with us, give us some time to explain. And if you still have the questions, we will be happy to address them. So today we'll be talking about IRA. I also want to give you just some background on our Kaulunani program, because if you're interested in this funding, you might also be interested in other elements of our program. So just for your awareness, we'll talk, I'll turn it over to Miranda. She'll talk specifically about the Inflation Reduction Act, IRA program that's rolling out now. I'll share a bit about our award that came to the state of Hawaii and some details on that, which is actually still in development. We will share information on our tree canopy viewer, which will be an important tool for you to use when you're creating your applications for the grants.gov IRA opportunity. And then we'll have questions. All right, thank you. Next slide, please. This is our team. I work closely on a day-to-day basis with Kate Vickman, who is our partnership coordinator, also with Koki Atchison, our Kupu member, and David Wood, our communications specialist there. Kate and David are in the background here supporting this, and I'm sharing the presentation today with Miranda Hutten from Region 5 of the U.S. Forest Service. She's our Urban and Community Forestry Program Manager. And thank you so much, Miranda, for being here today. Taking a step back, I just want to situate this session in the mission of our program, which is to support all of Hawaii's communities with a focus on equity to cultivate well-being and resilience through restorative and environmental justice, planting, caring for, and growing relationships with the trees and forests where we live, work, learn, and play. And this is closely aligned with our equity and justice statement. It's actually longer than this. You can read the whole thing on our website, but I just wanted to draw your attention here that we focus on underserved and low-income communities as well as Native Hawaiians, and that will be reflected later when we talk about priority areas for IRA. Our program is guided by our State Forest Action Plan, as well as this amazing advisory council comprised of folks from across the state with a range of different areas of expertise. Typically, they are the ones that make recommendations for our regular community grant program. This federal IRA funding opportunity will be managed differently. Next slide, please. You should know that we support Arbor Day throughout the state, and mark your calendars. This year it's on November 4th. Follow us to get information on where you can go to celebrate Arbor Day, including some tree adoption opportunities and potentially tree sales in your own neck of the woods. We have our own regular grant program within Kaulunani, completely separate from this IRA opportunity. Twice a year, we have community cost share grants. These are much smaller than IRA, but enough to really allow you to do something important in your community. The next one coming up is in May, and these awards are $5,000 to $15,000. We have Arbor Day grants that are released in November, awarded in February. And we also have the bipartisan infrastructure law grant that we'll be having the third round of that funding coming up at the end of this year. So keep an eye out for that as well. And then, our program, Kaulunani, is funded by the state as well as the U.S. Forest Service. And we work really in close partnership with Miranda, Hutten. And so I would like to turn it over to her now to share in more detail about our Inflation Reduction Act. Take it away, Miranda.
Thanks, Heather. Aloha, everyone. And just wanted to say thank you for this opportunity to partner with the state and talk a little bit about the Urban and Community Forestry Program from my viewpoint, as well as talk a lot about the program new grant addition, this Notice of Funding Opportunity, which is also a big, long word where I'm going to be using the acronym NOFO. So what I hope to talk to you about is just briefly orient you to, there's some familiar folks here on this call, but there's some folks that are new. And so orient you to the UCF program from the Forest Service perspective, and then get straight right into why we're all here, which is to talk about the Notice of Funding Opportunity, the NOFO, talk a little bit about the requirements, guidelines, spend some time about the match waivers, evaluation and timeline. And then I'm going to kick the presentation back to Heather to talk about some of the tools to maybe help you that have been developed in partnership with the state to better fill out your application. All right, fun fact. I don't know if you all know this, but the Urban and Community Forestry Program in the U.S. Forest Service is the only dedicated urban forest program in the entire federal government. We serve over 84% of the population across the United States. 84% live in urban and community areas. And in fact, our goal is to primarily work with the state, but also with a variety of different partners, nonprofits, community organizations, workforce development groups, to create a resilient and equitable tree canopy that's shared benefits by all. And we primarily do this through a grants and agreements program. So working in partnership with all of those groups by providing funds to work and invest from the ground up. Next slide. As you know, we often get pictures of the mainland with Hawaii as an inset off to the side, but I say my perspective is a little different from that, even though I work for the federal government. My region covers from California all the way to Palau. And so I am working in urban and community forest groups in all of these places and spaces. And the type of work that we do really ranges in each place. And we're going to talk about how this Notice of Funding Opportunity can help fund some of the projects that are growing, both here in the state of Hawaii, but also beyond that, because I know some of the folks on this call work across boundaries in this work. Thanks. I also want to highlight that the Urban and Community Forestry Program is one of the few USDA programs that is also a Justice 40 program that's highlighted in the NOFO, and I just felt it was important to explain ahead of time before we dive in. Justice 40 is based off an executive order by President Biden that guarantees no matter what grant or type we're doing, at least 40% of the benefits have to directly go towards benefiting disadvantaged communities. And that really takes the form of making sure we increase access and benefits to nature for all of our communities, and a strong focus on public health. So thinking about how we can combat extreme heat and climate resilience. So now we're getting into the NOFO. That was a really brief introduction. If you want to know more about the UCF program, please check out our website. There's some really great resources up there developed by our team. But I want to spend some time talking about the Inflation Reduction Act. Big picture, $1.5 billion is available. And It will be available until the funds run out or September 30th, 2031. And the funds very broadly are focused on tree and planted related activities. I'll talk a little bit more about what that might mean, but also a focus on underserved population areas. The way I like to say it is we've had funding in the past to do really great projects across the landscape. This allows us to reach so many more people, particularly in areas that maybe are under canopied or we haven't had a chance to have a partnership with yet. The notice of funding opportunity, this is the first round available to everyone, and I'll talk a little about who's eligible, just came out April 12th. I have links throughout this PowerPoint to that will be available afterwards, as Heather mentioned. But also at the end, I summarize all these links available. If you haven't had a chance to look at the notice of funding opportunity, as was mentioned by a lot of our partners, it's pretty short and very broad, so it's not one of these 40-page ones that you have to go through. Next slide, please. Some big picture takeaways from that 10-pager is one, you can ask for any funding between this range of numbers, 100,000 all the way to $50 million. There is no limit actually on the number of proposals you can put in. So you can be both putting in multiple proposals and be a partnering organization for other partners that you want to work with to help support their projects. You have 5 years to spend down whatever you request. This is a 5-year grant. What I tell partners that are new, that maybe haven't used federal grants before, think about putting in only for activities for 2 to 3 years, maybe 4 at the most, to allow for delays and incidents to come in. We all experienced the adventures around delays around COVID as an excellent example of something that was out of our control. So give yourself the time to be successful in your proposal. And last but not least, it doesn't seem like enough, it never is, but it's only 7 pages to share and tell your story about what you would like to do with that funding. Don't go beyond, they won't let you. Who is eligible to apply for this range of funding? State government entities, groups like Heather are allowed to, but also the Department of Education, other groups that maybe you want to work with, local government entities, City and County of Honolulu, excellent example of that. We also spell out that there's a number of government entities out in the islands that are either territories or Pacific affiliated islands that are eligible for this funding. I highlight these because I know some of the groups that are on this call also work in those areas. So in particular, Guam, American Samoa, the Northern Marianas Islands, Federated States of Micronesia, the Republic of Marshall Islands, and the Republic of Palau. We also have specific eligibility for tribes, nonprofit organizations, public and state-controlled institutions of higher education. So an example of that is University of Hawaii, and community-based organizations. So it can be as small as a homeowners association or as large as your state government applying to this funding. Just one final, sorry, to go back to that one slide, who is not eligible for funding? Businesses, small private startups, corporations are not eligible for this funding. Thanks. So touching base, what are some of the activities that are eligible for this funding? So say you're a state organization or a nonprofit, what does it mean by tree-related activities? What I've tried to put here is a few examples of all the types of work that I've been hearing people have been asking me about to fund. You can do a lot of things in your urban environment. You can do planning, you can do planting, and you can do management. So you can do all the way from planning to implementation to different tree restoration projects. Anything that's about protecting and enhancing urban tree canopy cover in areas that don't have high tree canopy cover are really great projects that are really part of what we'll be looking for as part of this review process. And I will also say that good projects, if you're planning and planting, really need to have a maintenance component to it successful. So you can use funds for maintenance of these different projects, though noting that it can't go beyond the 5-year period. Next slide. There's other types of examples that have come in. How do we improve climate resilience? A lot of folks have asked, can we do planning for storm preparedness? The answer is yes. Or climate resilience? The answer is yes. There's also a really strong connection to education and outreach and workforce development. A lot of folks have come up to me and asked, can I use this for creating scholarships? The answer is yes. For training paid experiences, paid on the job opportunities. The answer is yes. Also, you can use this for combination of forest health related projects. Particularly out here in Hawaii, I know a lot of times in order to plant, we first have to remove. So do know that that is also an acceptable cost. And I will say though, a good competitive project will have maybe some elements from multiple bullets here. So a planting and removal of invasive species, education and outreach, and workforce and development. So think about how you can pair these together to bring all of these types of activities there in your proposal. Who is not, oh, this is, I beat, what type of activities are not eligible for funding? Basic research. Folks may ask, what do I mean by basic research? The scientific study of different types of research questions. So an example I might give is we are doing a project where we're planning to publish an article in a journal or report. Probably is not going to be what we're funding, but we will fund, as part of this proposal, education and outreach activities to make sure that that information gets into the right hands for those that can use it. This funding cannot be used to acquire land or buy or acquire conservation easements. So if you're planning to buy some land, there's other great programs out there, but this is not one of them to use. We've gotten a lot of questions about small business startup funding. This is not an eligible use of this funding. And no big equipment purchases can be used. What is defined as equipment? Any single item that has a shelf life of over a year and costs more than costs more than $5,000. Classic example I get is, can we buy a car? And the answer is no, but you could lease a car, and that would fall under usually a supply category. So there's ways to work around that one. And last but not least, our authority does not extend to construction or infrastructure projects. We don't build roads. We don't build buildings. This is not, there are other programs out there that do this, but that's not the design of this funding. And again, a link to more details about this eligible funding is in this FAQ that you'll have access to at the end of this presentation. Next slide. I'm getting a lot of questions about, can we do things on private lands? And the answer is yes, but I would say funds are encouraged on projects for publicly accessible lands. And the reason why is we are a federal agency and we're charged, and it's part of our authority to provide to put funding towards public good. And so in order to work on private lands, you need to come up with some mechanisms in place to make sure that you're overcoming that hurdle that we worry about that all do any work on private lands, which is, how is it going to stand the test of time and how is it going to be accessible to others? And so I've put out a couple of examples here of how you might demonstrate, if you do decide to work on private lands, how you might incorporate some tools or education outreach opportunities to make sure that you are assuring these projects last. And I'm happy to talk about different ideas as well. These are just some examples that I came up with. Next slide. Reporting requirements. You have semi-annual reporting requirements in June and July if you receive funding. This is a grant. They are both a progress report and a financial report, i.e. how you're spending the money down. I will say I'm getting a lot of questions about, how do I get reimbursed? You need to keep up with this annual reporting because we cannot reimburse you if you are not up to date on reporting. You are allowed to get reimbursed as part of this grant and to get advances in 30 days to provide funding to either you or different partners. Speaking of which, sub-granting opportunities. I know some of the organizations on here are thinking about not just doing a program for themselves, but also creating their own competitive sub-grant opportunity. And just know that if you're planning to do any kind of sub-grant, contractual, or award, you need to think about 80% of that federal funding needs to be competitively sub-awarded. That means you need to have some sort of criteria, how you're evaluating, and you need to share that with the U.S. Forest Service, not during this proposal process, but with the grants, if you're awarded with your program grant manager with the U.S. Forest Service. I think a good proposal, though, will identify some of the key things that you might be using as criteria for that subaward process. So we understand that you understand what the priorities are. Anyone is eligible to apply regardless of disadvantaged community status. All these grants must be matched equally, dollar for dollar, 50% match. So for every dollar, you must match. However, if you are working 100% in disadvantaged communities as part of your proposal, you're allowed to ask for a match waiver, which waives that requirement. A lot of folks are interested in this, right? Because this is a really great way to bring capacity and funds to the ground to folks that maybe don't have the startup or availability to create match on their own. Heather is going to talk a little bit more about how we can think about disadvantaged community status, but the NOFO, the Notice of Funding Opportunity, does have a list of different national tools available for you to use. In addition, I have created a Region 5 match waiver guide with some government approved metrics for the state of, for each island and state that's in our region to help partners with this process, because not all data can be used to define your disadvantaged community status. It has to be federal or state derived data. And I would highly suggest that if you have questions about whether your data can be used as a match waiver, to send it to the shared email inbox that I will be sharing in a little bit. So hopefully I've enticed you to think about how your program and work or project could be a part of this process. We're really going to be evaluating it on these bulleted criteria: alignment with your Justice 40 status. So remember, I mentioned that the Justice 40 executive order says that a minimum 40% of all funds need to go to disadvantaged communities. Highlighting either if you're doing 100% or if you're providing match, how you're going to do that would be very important. Tiering your work to the State Forest Action Plan is also very important. That is a plan developed by partnerships with the state to highlight priorities, urban forestry priorities. It's really encompassing, great document. Make sure you cite that as part of your justification. And last but not least, we have our own 10-year urban and community forestry plan. Make sure you find some criteria in there that match what your goals are and cite it in your proposal as well. You'll be also based on your technical merit, capability, and capacity to propose that work. This doesn't mean you have to have the capacity in hand right now. You can use the funding to build that. Make sure you explain that in your strategy. Measurable results and outcomes. They're really interested particularly in what you're going to do in the first year. So make sure if you're doing a sub-grant or having some deliverables, highlight what will be done in the first year, especially because they'll be interested to know what that entails. And then last but not least, how you fill out your budget and cost effectiveness. Again, I just wanted to reiterate that looking at the State Forest Action Plan is always a good idea, whether you have the Notice of Funding of Opportunity or not. But the state has one that they've just done in 2016, and it is a really great starting place to get ideas if you're looking for ideas as well. So a little bit about the timeline. As I mentioned, this NOFO came out April 12th, 2023. Everything is due at 8:59 Pacific Standard Time. Please note that all of the notice of funding opportunity number, you're probably all used to this, are in Eastern Standard Time. So no, it's not 12 o'clock your time, it's 12 o'clock their time. And last but not least, sometime in the fall, they will be announcing who is the recipients of the awards. I really want to reiterate, if you are interested in applying and you haven't started the process yet, today, go on and get a SAMS ID. This is you have to have a SAMS ID in order to apply for this funding opportunity. Any organization that's eligible can get a SAMS ID. I like to jokingly say, this is to ensure you're not the mafia or you're up to date with your taxes. This is the way the federal government verifies that. And it's not just the Forest Service. It is across the federal government. If you have any award or contract, you probably already have a SAMS ID. Full acknowledgement that the average process time to get that, if you haven't already, is 45 days. And you may say, Miranda, wait, we have less than 45 days to apply to this. I know I did not make the deadline. What I would really suggest is you get on today and you call them. Be the squeaky wheel. We have found that this works and shortens the deadline for you. Be the squeaky wheel. If for some reason you don't think you have the capacity to get on in the next day or so to make this happen, I would also suggest that you reach out to maybe partners that do already have federal grants and see if you can partner with them on your projects and processes. The official place for this agreement is on grants.gov. You can search on this code. Next slide. But I really suggest you go straight to the portal. All the same information is on the portal, and this is where you can upload all of the documents. On that portal, we have a fair bit of application help. Wanted to highlight just a few of these things that are available in our forms, templates, and resources section. There's a pre-award guide and checklist. There's also a navigation guide, as well as recorded webinars. There's all sorts of tools and useful tidbits in there of how to write a budget for the first time if you haven't done that before. What is plain language speaking? What do we define? Common definitions of terms and work. Really take a chance to look through that. I know it's a lot of different paperwork out there, but it will really help hone in your proposal to something that is competitive. I meant to say this earlier when we were talking about judging, but I'll say it right now. Most of the people that will be looking at these guides will not be familiar with the local geography and history and lingo of Hawaii or Pacific Islands. Make sure you know who your target audience is. It's folks that are in DC. So make sure you write to that level in your proposal as you're working. There is 2 webinars. Unfortunately, they're only recorded at this time. One just happened yesterday, April 18th, and there'll be another one April 25th. The one on April 18th outlines a lot of the similar things that I'm talking about here today, though from a national perspective. Really great to tune into the recording of the April 25th one, though, because basically that will be walking through how to enter in all of your information on the portal. And these are recorded and will be available the day after on the portal to view for anyone. And last but not least, I have a list of all of the resources I just mentioned at the end of this PowerPoint, not hyperlinked with the words, but also just so you can copy and paste them in. I've also highlighted on the next slide particular regional resources that have been put together by myself and my team. I want to also highlight that on April 26th, I will be also hosting a similar webinar, but focused in on all of our Pacific Islands outside of Hawaii. So that is a time to tune in if you think you're working across some of those other islands, because we're going to spend some time talking about how we wave match there, since a lot of these national tools mentioned in the NOFO don't cover those areas. Thanks. Oh, last slide. Last but not least, I may be directing you to this lovely email that begins sm.fs if I can't answer questions. This is the shared email inbox for all IRA notice of funding opportunity questions. However, if you have a question about getting access to the portal or something isn't working, there is a separate contact tech help group for doing that. And I've also put their email in here as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Miranda. Lots of good info, and just a reminder to everyone, you'll have access to this PowerPoint after the presentation today. Miranda shared some great national and regional resources. These local resources based here in Hawaii are also options for you to help build capacity or reach out and get help as you think about creating your proposal and think about building capacity within your own group to be able to take this on. So I encourage you to consider these resources. Next, I want to talk a little about the IRA award for our state of Hawaii, specifically that came to our urban and community forestry program, Kaulunani. This award announcement was made the same day that the NOFO was released. So just last week, Hawaii is allocated $1.5 million. After we take the indirect rate of just under 10%, which does things like cover our fiscal, some salary for fiscal folks to help us manage and a portion of our utilities here. 80% of that award will be re-granted through subgrants to community partners, and 20% will be for program support. So for staff time other than me and some supplies to grow the capacity of our state program. The details of the subgrant program that will be managed here within Hawaii are still being finalized, so please stay tuned for that. There will be match waiver available for priority communities, and I'm going to talk a little bit more soon about what that means. I'll be talking about that right now, in fact. There are a few tools, some have been mentioned already. Some of you may be familiar with the CGES tool. Here in Hawaii, we have developed a really clear way for you to understand what is being considered a priority area here. In the language of the federal government, these are disadvantaged communities. These are our priorities here in Hawaii. The Enviro Atlas is another national tool, as is this environmental justice screening and mapping tool. So these are all federally derived data, which is required for us to be able to have this pre-approved. Next slide. I'm going to demo this. Some of you might be familiar already with our tree canopy viewer here in Hawaii. So this is a statewide geospatial explorable resource that includes canopy data, as well as socio-demographic and health data. This was released last year in anticipation of the need to demonstrate priority areas here in Hawaii. We've added new layers specifically for IRA. And so what I would like to do now is that the last slide or is there one more? Oh yeah, sorry, one more slide. This is, I won't go through all of these. I really encourage you to go to the viewer itself and be able to explore the relationships between tree canopy and some of this socio-economic, demographic, and health data as a way to really help prioritize growing the canopy all around us and how they can have the most impacts in communities that can benefit the most. Next slide. So if you haven't already been there yourself, you can use this QR code to visit, but let's take a drive together and I'll do my best to demo for you. I'm going to share my screen. Let's see here. So that QR code will take you to the page within our own program website that describes the tree canopy viewer, what tree canopy is, how the data was collected, gives you information on all the layers that are in there. There is even a link here to a tutorial on how to use the tool. That's there. You can access the viewer here at this link. I have it in another tab just to ensure that it loaded quickly. So here are all the layers that we built originally before this IRA opportunity was on the horizon. Over here, I want to draw your attention in the right corner to this IRA button. So when you first open the tree canopy viewer, this is what it will look like. As I said, I really encourage you to explore. In here. You can put in an address or you can just zoom right in. Clicking on this IRA button, you can see the priority layers here that will have been pre-approved to designate communities in need or underserved communities. So if you would like to demonstrate that in your application, which is highly encouraged because it will make you more competitive and it will make you more eligible to apply for a match waiver. You need not meet all 5 of these in order to qualify for a match waiver, but the stronger the case you can make, the better you can tell your story about how the potential impact of your project, the stronger it will be. So this first, I'm going to just for visibility's sake, turn off this tree canopy layer here so you can see. This first layer here duplicates the CGIS tool, which is the federally derived data based on census tracts where disadvantaged is according to socioeconomic and environmental indicators. This is not really the best tool for Hawaii. It doesn't pick up quite a few things because it's based on federal data sets that aren't comprehensive for us. The second priority area here, I would just want to mention too that these were developed, we spent quite a bit of time thinking about how to identify our priority areas. We talked to researchers, we did a bunch of our own research, we engaged our Kaulunani Urban and Community Forestry Advisory Council on this, and this is what we came up with. The second priority here, and the priorities are not in order of priority. They're just numbered. So is Native Hawaiian population, and areas with Native Hawaiians were designated as priority as a mean to address enduring legacies of historical injustice that persist due to the illegal overthrow of the Hawaiian Kingdom in 1893 and due to 1,800,000 acres of ceded land being taken without consent or compensation to Native Hawaiians or their sovereign government. This one is very extensive, as you can see here. Turn that off. Priority 3, areas with low urban tree canopy. So you'll see there's overlap with a number of these layers. Again, you have the ability to zoom right in. Priority 4, high urban heat severity index. So this is helping us identify urban heat islands. This was chosen because of the impact of heat severity in terms of energy consumption, reduced air quality, and human health. Sorry, I forgot to mention that for urban tree canopy. So a standard that is out there in terms of what is enough or kind of a baseline urban tree canopy percentage is 30%. So these priority areas with low is identifying areas with under 30% tree canopy. And to get more fine grain, you can put in an address here. For example, I put Halanimoku, that's where I'm sitting right now, here in downtown Honolulu, across from the Capitol. So you can put in a specific address here. Once you turn on the canopy and census statistics, So this is the census tract that includes our building. You'll be able to see all of these statistics in one place, including percent canopy cover, the socio-demographic and economic data as well. So can be really useful for telling your story. The last priority listed here I want to draw your attention to is low income. And we identified areas of low income as those that are in elementary school districts that have at least one Title I school. And we used elementary school districts because those are the most granular compared to high school districts or high school zones or complex areas. So for folks that are interested in working, statewide in a broad geography, you can explore that here. Or if you have a specific address or a specific census tract or a specific neighborhood, you can explore that all here. Let's see, anything else I might have left out? Oh, I think that's going to stop sharing my screen here. I think we have maybe a couple more slides. Pretty soon we'll be turning to the Q&A portion. Here we are. All right then. Thanks everyone for hanging in there. I know it was a ton of information in a short time. And so we are available to address questions in the chat. I haven't been able to, I tried to answer a couple as Miranda was speaking, but it's kind of hard to do. So I'm going to turn it over to Kate, who's been helping to monitor that and help direct us so we can make sure and get things answered. If we need to stay on a bit later, past 1, 2, we're certainly willing.
Thank you, Heather, and thank you, Miranda, and thanks everyone for your awesome questions. I'm going to go through them pretty much in the order they came in, but try and group together themes if I can. A couple of early questions about the budget. How do we handle the budget narrative if we're not sure whether the match waiver is going to be granted or not? They would look quite different.
Yeah, tough question, right? I have this project and I might be able to, how are you defining disadvantaged community status you're unsure about? So here's my 2 words of a couple ideas of advice. If you're trying to use something outside of the tools that Heather and I mentioned on this call, really email. I would highly suggest today you email that shared email inbox and tell them, say like, I'm trying to do this and use this particular metric. Will it work? And that way you get some certainty about how you want to move that proposal forward. Beyond that, unfortunately, I did not develop this notice of funding opportunity, nor I saw it all when you all did, nor am I in charge of making that decision. So that was the best advice I can give. The other option you can do is in your proposal, if you feel comfortable, you could say, if for some reason you question this disadvantage, we might be able to provide match for it. So that way you've left the door open for a conversation with the reviewers.
I'll just add on, Wei, I know you asked that question earlier on. I think it was before I demoed the tree canopy viewer with the new IRA layers. And now that you've seen it, you can quickly check there and see if the place that you're thinking of working lights up with any one of those 5. And if it does, as I understand it, Miranda can correct me, you are pre-approved for a match waiver.
Yeah. You need to justify it in your proposal, what you're using. You can't just say, I'm applying to a match waiver in disadvantaged community. You've got to explain what you're using. The idea is that viewer helps you not have to go out and hunt and search for this on your own.
Thank you both. And a similar sort of thematic question, if the awards are announced in fall of 23, is it fair to assume that proposed projects would be looking at a January 24 to December 28 timeline? Is that a fair assumption?
That's a fair assumption. I would say probably, hopefully, we'll award it sometime a little bit before January, but at the latest, hopefully that would be a very solid and good proposal to bring in, because that gives you wiggle room as a project manager to start things on your own schedule and time, as opposed to trying to think about, oh, if I start this in September, but I don't get the funding until November, what am I supposed to be doing?
On a more technical question, for the climate resilience aspect of proposals or themes, does this include things like green infrastructure, green roofs, living wall projects, those sorts of things?
Okay, so those things are awesome. I love when we have projects that do that. Probably not for this funding though, right? We're in the trees business. And so a lot of those types of projects often involve a heavy amount of purchase of plants. And I know that seems funny that we don't pay for that, since we're part of their kind of part of the larger green infrastructure work, but it's got to be a tree focus. They will most assuredly probably not love a proposal that is focused on just green walls and that type of work.
Miranda, you mentioned right to who you think is about, or who is evaluating this. So, the folk in DC on a federal level. Are these peers? Are they working in the urban and community forestry field, or are they from a variety of backgrounds?
We don't know yet who's going to be reviewing them. It could be as high as the department level. And so you're probably going to have a mix of a few people that know urban and community forestry program pretty well at our Washington office level, maybe one region person, but it may not be me. It may be someone from the South or the Northeast. So a good assumption, as I said, is to assume that you need to educate them about the unique, spend some time, spend a little bit of that capital, that space, explaining why Hawaii is unique and special and why you need this funding. As much as I'd love to say, use local, use some local words or Hawaiian words, that's another one there where I would just say, if you're using them, make sure you translate them, but don't assume that folks are going to know what those mean.
Great. And the two-part question here, they're related. If someone could clarify the difference between entities who can be included as partners in the grant versus for sub-awardees. And then sort of for clarification, someone wrote, I second this, read the partners versus sub-awardees. The NOFO makes this issue confusing, and it makes it sound like any sub-award, even to a partner, has to be awarded competitively.
Okay, let me see if I can say this one a little more succinctly. Let's assume I am a nonprofit. I would like to competitively subaward projects for workforce development. I may have a mixture of funding streams out there. I may have some funding for personnel. I may have some funding for supplies, but that subaward category, say I'm putting out $100, 80% of whatever is subawarded total needs to be competitive, needs to have some sort of rubric or process where you're evaluating and requesting people to come in. The reasoning behind this is, I think the Washington office was trying to make sure that there isn't a huge overcharge of administrative costs to do this, and to make sure that you are subgranting, the funding is getting to the ground. It's an imperfect solution to a imperfect problem, but that's what they're trying to get at there. And so within that subaward category, 80% needs to go competitively. Does that answer the question?
So but it just say 2 or 3 organizations want to get together to submit a proposal together as partners. They don't need to show that they competitively selected those partnerships. It's only if that group was then saying, we're going to redistribute most of this money, that process has to be the competitive one. I think that.
It really depends on what the partnership is. right? So for instance, I've seen examples where a nonprofit is coming in and it's asking for technical expertise, say from a research partner that may be providing something in kind. You're not necessarily having a direct financial relationship with them. You know, that doesn't apply, but really that sub-grants category has to be 80%. And so it's something just to consider when you're kind of moving partners together, how you make that work. I know it's imperfect. I know that can make it a little frustrating, but unfortunately that's how this particular NOFO was constructed.
Is there a tool that helps us determine which regions qualify as urban?
So I've had this question, how are we defining urban? Is it people? Is there a map? And the answer is we have the NOFO made a conscious decision not to define urban because our program has both urban and community level components. So there's also a slight rural aspect to the work that we do, and we didn't want to limit it because urban in California, as you might imagine, looks very different than urban in Hawaii or urban in Palau. And so there is no set definition of urban, which really broadens, I think, the number of communities and places you could apply. So the only criteria that we're using to kind of control the landscape, again, is the eligible entities and the type of land, public and private land.
Great. And another one for you, Miranda. Looking forward, are there plans for future rounds, or is this a one-shot deal for IRA?
Okay, I was waiting for that question. So I can only convey what the Washington office leadership has said, which is they plan to do multiple rounds. I do not know how many. I do not know their size. I do know that there's a very dynamic tension between the Forest Service getting some heavy encouragement to get the funding out quickly versus allowing this for multiple opportunity rounds. So I would just suggest if you have a project and proposal ready, go for this round. Do it.
Do it. Okay. Heather, a couple of questions about the canopy viewer and the data there. What criteria was used to define Native Hawaiian? Was it a specific threshold percentage?
No, it's federally derived data, so based on census data. So it would be self-identified.
Excellent. So based on the census data, that's sort of a really important.
Yeah, going back to the canopy viewer, it's the designation of Native Hawaiian population. The unit of analysis is census tract. And in order to be designated in that layer as having Native Hawaiian population, it must be at least 1% or greater Native Hawaiians in that census tract.
All right, next question. Thank you. Winston, I think we've addressed your question about who is reviewing them, but let me know, pop another one in if you need a follow up on that. Do we have any information or a timeline, Heather, on the request for projects for the Hawaii portion and the subgrant awards?
Thanks for the question. We expect to know by early May to be able to get back with folks on how that's going to work. The lowest amount you can ask for in the federal NOFO is 100,000, and I can tell you for the Hawaii competitive process, it will certainly be less than that. It will allow for smaller asks than that. Beyond how it's going to work, beyond that, I don't have any details to share with you yet, but stay tuned, stay in touch. You know how to contact us, and we'll definitely be sharing that out on our website and social media. We can do other announcements on MailChimp as well. So make sure you're on our list to stay informed.
And this one's for both of you. What is the connection between the federal and the Hawaiian opportunities and the major differences? And do you recommend that people apply for both to increase chances?
Well, one big difference is the timing, right? So this one's now, also the amounts, and the criteria for reviewing will probably be a little different. It'll have different focus criteria. So I think, you know, how I said, I talked a little bit about who's going to be evaluating these projects is going to be folks in DC. Heather's you know, the one focused on the state managed by Heather and her team will be more just available for Hawaii and focused in. And, you know, there's opportunities, I think, to think about projects that might, different scales fit both. My gut check is, though, that if you get a lot of funding through my funding opportunity through the U.S. Forest Service and then come and ask again later on at the Hawaii one, that there should be maybe a clear reason of why you're going after both. And hopefully you will know one way or another whether you got funding from my opportunity before Heather's was even out. So you'll be able to make that decision and with some knowledge.
Yeah, just a little more detail on that. We're required to have our state RFP go out within 6 months. Once it is announced, we'll be giving you more than probably the really short timeline that is given here for the NOFO. The reporting for awardees will do will be state reporting, not through the federal portal. The review process, as Miranda mentioned, will be local. Beyond that, I don't have a lot of details to share with you quite yet. We're still finalizing things. So I'd like to give you complete and detailed, accurate information all at once rather than just streaming it out. So stay tuned.
I just want to acknowledge that it is 12:58. Thank you to the panelists, Heather and Miranda, who have offered to stay on and continue answering the questions. We've probably got another 10 questions unanswered as yet in the chat. Those of you that have to pop off now, we will be posting this on the website, the full webinar, so you can see the answers to all the questions that are coming now, should you have to jump off.
Great.
All righty. Oh, here's a good one. Would agroforestry be looked on favorably? That is emphasizing the delivery of food resources and food security to communities rather than just for green space and other outcomes.
The answer is emphatically yes. It's a priority in our National Forest Action Plan. I've heard our leadership talk about how they want to hopefully see agroforestry projects come in for this round. Aspirationally, it's also part of your state forest action plan as a priority. That is a great topic that aligns with so many different levels of priorities. Boy, oh boy, yes.
All righty. Here's another one about the canopy viewer. I think Oahu has hot zones identified as it relates to climate change, and planting trees are the first solution. Is this taken into account locally but not ranking high on the social justice rankings?
Can you repeat that question one more time? Sorry.
I think they're asking, is there a reason that the heat index is not perhaps one of the priority layers for IRA?
It is.
It is? All right. Elizabeth, pop another question in the chat box if that hasn't been clarified for you.
What she might be asking is that there are areas that are very hot that we all know that don't appear on that layer, and it's because they're not urban. At a statewide level, the data set we had available to us to provide statewide information was through this work that Trust for Public Land did that limited it to urban heat islands. So we all know there are many hot places outside of the urban zones, but they won't get picked up on that layer. So I would assume, based on the really broad coverage of the other 4 layers, that your priority, there are other priorities that would give you coverage and qualify you to ask for the match waiver. You could also then in your narrative talk about how hot it is in your place, even though it doesn't appear in the urban heat island or urban heat severity index.
A couple more partner and sub-award questions here. One person's more interested in the opposite scenario. So if there is a not-for-profit organization partnering with another not-for-profit, one's going to be the lead agency to make the submission. Is that considered a sub-award that needs to be competitively awarded if it's two writing together?
Yeah, so again, right, 80% of your sub-awards. And if you are sub-awarding to a nonprofit that's a partner, my understanding as the NOFO reads is you can use 20% non-competitively, but that 80%'s got to be competitive.
So would it be fair to say that perhaps if there's a couple of organizations joining together, partnering together to submit an application, that perhaps them having a sub-award process within their narrative or their proposal would not be in their best interest? They would perhaps be proposing activities rather than sub-awards.
Yeah, it really depends on what your organization's goals are. You're absolutely right. So I think you just need to understand what your capacities are and your willingness to kind of think around some of these constraints. I will admit it doesn't quite fit as neatly into building partnerships as it could. But that is what is written. And so that's one good piece of advice, Kate. And I would also say that, you know, another piece of advice is if you all are thinking about partnering, you could come in with separate proposals and make sure that those proposals complement each other and talk about each other. So they know that if they fund one, they should fund the other.
All right, I'm going to ask one more question on this topic because there's a lot of interest in this and that clarification, and I think it's a really fair one. So just say there's a tree planting organization, a workforce development specialist, and a tree maintenance organization, and they're like, wow, we've got all these three opportunities that will fulfill these benefits to communities really well, but only one person can apply. Do they have to explain why they joined up with these other two organizations? Can they say, we are going to split this budget 33, 33, 33, for example, or does that need to be explained or go through an award process? So if three sort of organizations that do complementary but slightly different things want to put one big proposal together and say that we're going to need a third of the budget each, can they do that?
So if they're sub-awarding, if one group goes in and they're trying to split it 30, 30, 30, that as the NOFO reads, 80% needs to be competitively allocated. So they can't pick ahead of time how that's going to work. Now, something to think about is you could email that shared inbox with this hypothetical question. I think if they hear from enough folks, they might be willing to have some flexibility, but as it is written, right? I'm the messenger, not the developer here. As it is written, any sub-awards, 80% of the funding needs to be competitive. So the answer is no.
Right, a partnership and a sub-award are considered the same thing, essentially.
How it's written in a budget, yes.
At the moment, yeah. Great, thank you for that. And really good advice on perhaps everyone who's got concerns about that to email that general inbox. Regarding the budget, is there a maximum amount that can go towards materials and supplies? Are the budget categories capped in any way?
Nope, not capped. Just the sub-awards has that funky little 80-20 rule.
Awesome.
However, here's the caveat on this, Kate, for that question. If you come in with a proposal and all you want is $1 million worth of supplies and you do all these activities and we don't see in the budget where the people power is coming from, we may question your ability to pull this off. So if you're bringing in other resources, say you've got personnel covered, make sure you put that in there so folks understand who are reviewing this, the complete picture of that project. Because we have had in the past where partners come in and they just ask for funding in one category, say supplies, and don't adequately explain that no, we already have personnel, we have them salaried, we have them covered, that we can bring to bear for this project. They won't fare as well because the reviewers only have your 7-page proposal to go off of. They don't know that about your organization.
I've got one about the waiver. Can we cite the tree canopy viewer in the waiver justification for the federal opportunities? It isn't one of the items specifically listed in the NOFO or the tools.
Yes, so the NOFOs has 3 suggestions, and then it says or government derived tools. That this falls into the latter category. You can cite the viewer, but you're going to have to be a little more specific than just say the viewer. You have to talk about a geographic region, and I would also use that data that Heather pulled up about saying this falls into a high severity index area, extreme heat area. This has a certain percent of native Hawaiian populations. Use those tools, provide that information for them as well.
Great, thank you. Heather, a couple of questions about overhead and indirect, particularly on the local opportunities. We've been asked, can you review the grant funding percentages to be taken out by Kaulunani and general overheads before we actually look at our projects? For example, if we write a grant for $100, does $9.85 come out directly and leave us with $90.15? And then we need to deduct 20% of that for Kaulunani overhead.
Sorry for the confusion on probably stemming from the way I explained our award. So of the 1.5 million that the state of Hawaii's Kaulunani program was allocated, our indirect charge is just under 10%. And then I was explaining after that, 80% will be sub-granted. And then we are holding 20% as all of you are also allowed to do through the NOFO for your own, whatever you're proposing for yourself. So we are keeping 20% of our award for our programmatic, to build programmatic, capacity. The rest we are re-granting. If you apply for $100 hypothetically from that sub-award program through the state, Kaulunani will not be taking a cut of your request. You will ask for your own indirect. That is appropriate for your program and your project. I hope
Yes.
that.
On that note, Miranda, are there any guidelines around maximum indirect or overheads outside the 2080 sub-award guidelines, but within the budget directly, are there any maximums or mins set for indirects and overhead?
All right, this is across the federal government, folks. So if you have a negotiated indirect rate, you do need to use that. A lot of organizations, I would say, especially universities and state governments, probably already have a negotiated indirect rate with the federal government. So it's worth looking around, talking to your finance department if you do not know, or your budgeting department if you do not know if you have one, to make sure that you are aware of what that is and what it covers. So sometimes those indirect rates are really low, but they only cover like the water. So you can want to make sure that you've got what you need covered in your indirect. If you do not have an indirect rate, you are allowed to apply the de minimis amount, which is 10%.
Great, thank you, Miranda. Another question about match. If we're doing a match, it's a 5-year time frame. We're confident there's going to be cash funds coming in the future, but we don't have them now. Do we need to have, if we're proposing cash match, to have that now? Or can we accrue it over the period of the grant?
You can accrue it over the period of the grant. Remember, match can come in many different forms. It can come in the form of cash. It can also come in the form of in-kind activities as well as volunteer hours. So use all of those types of tools ready or options are ready and available for you to provide match.
Awesome. A couple of other budget category questions. To what extent can advocacy and partnership building, for example, advocacy for tree planting in disadvantaged communities, be covered by IRA funding?
So In the federal government, this is one of those ones where you want to be sure about your keywords. Advocacy means something different to the federal folks than it maybe does to you. Advocacy means to us, we are going in and advocating about legislation. We are saying we want more money to do this and we want activities. As a federal government, we are not allowed to advocate for ourselves, nor are we allowed to pay people to advocate, say for like a proposition or amendments. That is not our role for this funding. However, advocacy in the broad sense means something very different, I think, to most groups. It means outreach and education, and you can absolutely educate and outreach about the benefits of trees, workforce development, the projects you were doing as part of this grant. My suggestion would be, don't use the word advocacy to describe what you're doing. Remember what I was saying about who's reading these. It's high-level department people, and they may interpret advocacy in that other light.
Alrighty, one more tree canopy viewer question here. Are the shape files or the data sets from the urban tree canopy viewer available online or downloadable?
Oh, why yes, they are. On that same website that Heather had up earlier, there is a whole list of by county available to you to download and to manipulate in your own GIS adventures. We just ask that you cite it if you're using it.
Okay, I think we've covered everything here. My sincere apologies if I have missed your question, but I think we've managed to put them together or they've been answered in these great responses from Heather and Miranda. So I'm going to hand over back to you guys.
Great. Well, you know by now where to find us. If you have other questions that come up, you have quite a few resources at your fingertips. I mean, one question I'll just throw out there is at this kind of late hour of the end of the webinar is, you know, we are interested in continuing to respond to questions and providing support as we can. Not exactly sure what that might look like. And community meeting or another format like this, perhaps maybe something that's more interactive than a webinar, but a meeting, you know, smaller group meetings. We're also considering doing things like office hours where we'll be in a Zoom room at a certain time on a certain day that will be advertised and folks can just pop in and ask questions. If you have particular ideas on what might be useful, we're interested to hear what that would look like. Yes, no.
Thanks, Heather. And I just wanted to say thank you, everyone, for getting on this call today. What a really great set of questions. I can tell a lot of folks have really dug into reading and trying to understand this notice of funding opportunity. And just know, reiterate again, that there is that shared email inbox. If for some reason we didn't answer your question or we missed kind of a variation of your question or another one comes up, I really strongly encourage you send that question to the shared email inbox because that's kind of the central depository for all questions. And then your answer gets posted on the portal. And so that's one way to not only get your question answered, but also share that answer with everyone else because chances are that you're not the only one with that question.
All right, gang. Looking forward to learning more about all the great work that you're proposing and looking forward to working together. So thanks again for your interest and stay in touch.
Yep. Mahalo.